The conference room smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke. It was 1983, late October, New York City. Outside the building, the streets buzzed with taxis and voices. Inside on the 14th floor, the air stood still. Jackson Browne sat across from the editor. The editor's name doesn't matter. What mattered was the look on his face, tight, uncomfortable, like a man holding his breath underwater. Between them, on the glass table, lay a stack of typed pages, 11 pages, single-spaced. The article that would never run. Jackson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He'd already read it twice. Once alone in his hotel room at 3 a.m, and once again an hour ago in the lobby. Downstairs, standing by the window, watching people who didn't know his name walk past. The editor cleared his throat. "We think it's better if we hold off." Jackson nodded slowly. He looked down at the pages. His own words stared back at him. Words about Central America, about what he'd seen in El Salvador, about villages burned, about children who didn't make it to morning, about American money funding the fire. "Hold off," Jackson repeated, not a question, just an echo. The editor shifted in his chair. "It's not that we don't believe you. It's just," he paused. His hand hovered over the pages like he wanted to push them away, but couldn't quite bring himself to touch them. "It's complicated." Jackson had heard that word before. Complicated. It was the word people used when they meant dangerous, when they meant unpopular, when they meant we'd rather not. He didn't argue. He just sat there, looking at the men across from him, waiting. Behind the editor, through the glass wall, Jackson could see the open office. Desks cluttered with records and posters, phones ringing, writers hunched over typewriters, the machinery of music journalism grinding forward, shaping what people would read, what they would think, what they would care about. And somewhere in that machine, a decision had been made. Not about the truth, not about the quality of the writing, but about risk, about reputation, about what a magazine could afford to lose. Jackson Browne was not a politician. He was not a soldier. He was a songwriter from Southern California who wrote about love and loss and loneliness, about roads that stretched too long and hearts that broke too easy. People knew his voice. Soft, aching, honest. They knew his songs, Running on Empty, The Pretender, Doctor My Eyes, songs that made you feel something true. But this wasn't a song. This was 11 pages of witness. 11 pages of what he'd seen when he traveled south, past the border, past the headlines, into the places where policy became pain. He'd gone with a group of musicians and activists. They weren't there to perform. They weren't there to be seen. They were there to see. And what Jackson saw, he couldn't unsee. He saw mothers who couldn't cry anymore because crying was a luxury. He saw men who'd lost their sons and couldn't bury them because the ground was too dangerous. He saw American-made weapons in the hands of soldiers who didn't speak his language, but whose violence he understood perfectly. He came back different, quieter, heavier, and he wrote about it. Not in metaphor, not in melody, in plain, direct language. He named what he saw. He named who paid for it. He named the silence that allowed it to continue. The magazine had commissioned the piece. They'd asked him to write it. They knew what he'd gone to see. They knew what he believed. And for a few weeks it seemed like they would run it. But now, sitting in that room with the cold fluorescent light pressing down on both of them, Jackson understood. The article had become inconvenient. The editor leaned forward. "Look, Jackson, you're a musician. People love you for your music. They trust you. But this," he tapped the pages lightly, "this is political. And when you get political, you divide people. You lose half your audience before you even start." Jackson's jaw tightened, not with anger, with something older. Sadness, maybe. Disappointment. "I'm not trying to divide anyone," he said quietly. "I'm trying to tell the truth." "Your truth," the editor said. Not cruelly, just carefully. "No," Jackson said. "The truth. What's happening isn't opinion. It's happening. The editor sighed. He leaned back, folding his arms. I don't disagree with you, I really don't. But the magazine has a position. We have advertisers. We have relationships. If we publish this, we're taking a stand, and not everyone here is ready for that stand. Jackson looked at him for a long moment. He thought about all the times he'd been in rooms like this. Record label offices, boardrooms, meetings where men in suits decided what art was safe, what message was acceptable, what truth could be sold. Music had always been his way out of those rooms. Songs didn't need permission. Songs didn't need a committee. You wrote them, you sang them, and if they were honest, people felt them. But this wasn't a song. This was prose. This was journalism, and journalism, he was learning, had gatekeepers. So what happens now? Jackson asked. The editor spread his hands. We don't run it. You keep the kill fee. You're free to take it somewhere else if you want. But Jackson, he paused, his voice dropping. No one's going to run this. Not the way it is. It's too much. It's too direct. Jackson reached forward and picked up the pages. He held them in his hands, feeling the weight of them. 11 pages, maybe 3,000 words, hours of thought. Days of revision. Months of seeing things he couldn't forget. All of it refused. He stood up. The editor stood too, instinctively, like he wanted to offer a handshake but wasn't sure if it would be accepted. Thanks for your time, Jackson said. The editor nodded. For what it's worth, I think you're brave. Jackson looked at him, not with bitterness, just with clarity. Brave would be publishing, he said. Then he walked out. The hallway was long and white and quiet. His footsteps echoed. Somewhere behind him, the office continued. Phones rang. Typewriters clacked. The machine kept running. Jackson took the elevator down alone. He stood in the corner, staring at the fluorescent panel above him, the pages folded in his hand. When the doors opened, he stepped into the lobby and walked out into the October cold. New York City moved around him. People rushed past, bundled in coats, chasing cabs, chasing time. No one looked at him. No one knew what had just happened. To them, he was just another man on the street. But Jackson felt the weight. Not of failure, not of rejection, of silence. He'd written the truth, and the truth had been deemed too dangerous to print. That night, back in his hotel room, Jackson sat by the window and looked out at the city. Light stretched in every direction. Millions of people living millions of lives, most of them unaware of what was happening in countries whose names they couldn't pronounce. He thought about the mothers he'd met, the ones who grabbed his hand and spoke in hurried Spanish, tears in their eyes, begging him to tell people what was happening. They didn't care that he was a musician. They didn't care that he was American. They cared that he had a voice, that he could go back, that he could speak. And he had tried. He had written it down, every detail, every face, every name he could remember. He had tried to make people see what he had seen, to feel what he had felt, and it hadn't been enough. Or maybe it had been too much. Jackson wasn't naive. He knew how the world worked. He knew that art and politics were supposed to stay separate. He knew that musicians were supposed to entertain, not educate. He knew that the moment you spoke about something uncomfortable, you became uncomfortable. But he also knew that silence was a choice, and he couldn't choose it. Over the next few weeks, Jackson tried. He sent the article to other magazines, smaller ones, independent ones. Some didn't respond. Some said they liked it but couldn't run it. One editor told him, gently, that publishing it would be career suicide for both of them. Eventually, Jackson stopped trying. He didn't throw the article away. He kept it, filed it in a drawer somewhere between tour itineraries and unfinished song lyrics, a document of something true that no one wanted to read. But the experience changed him, not in an obvious way. He didn't become bitter. He didn't rage against the system. He didn't write an angry song about censorship or cowardice. Instead, he became quieter. He kept touring, kept writing, kept singing the songs people loved, running on empty, still-filled arenas, Somebody's Baby still played on the radio. People still came to his shows, swaying and singing along, feeling something they couldn't name. But Jackson carried the weight of what he'd seen. And every time he stood on stage, under the lights, in front of thousands of people who loved him, he wondered how many of them knew, how many of them cared, how many of them would still love him if he told them the truth. He didn't test it. He'd already tried. Years later, in interviews, Jackson would talk about that time. Not with bitterness, not with regret, just with a kind of weary clarity. I thought if I wrote it down, if I was honest, people would listen, he said once. But I learned that honesty isn't always welcome, especially when it's uncomfortable. He paused. That doesn't mean you stop being honest. It just means you understand the cost. The article never ran. Rolling Stone moved on. So did the world. The war in Central America continued. People died. Children grew up without parents. Villages burned. And most of America never knew. Or if they knew, they didn't care enough to stop it. Jackson kept singing, kept writing, kept touring. But something had shifted. The boy who wrote love songs about open roads and endless summers had become a man who knew that some roads led to places you couldn't sing your way out of. He didn't stop caring. But he learned to carry it differently. To hold the pain without letting it destroy him. To speak the truth even when no one wanted to hear it. To understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep going after the world says no. The 11 pages stayed in the drawer, but the words stayed in him. And every time he picked up a guitar, every time he stepped onto a stage, every time he opened his mouth to sing, he carried them with him, not as a burden, as a reminder. That some things are worth saying even when no one will print them. That some truths are worth holding even when the world turns away. That silence is not peace, and that the cost of speaking is always less than the cost of staying quiet. Jackson Browne was banned from Rolling Stone, not officially, not publicly, but in the way that mattered most. They refused to let him tell the truth. And in refusing, they told their own.